I, 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 I got a letter from the government the other day. I opened and read it and burned that. Man, the way that I live don't concern that. Man,
Welcome to another edition of Critical Insight in Your World News. I'm your host, Solomon Kamajan, and I'm joined today by Carl Dix of the Revolutionary Communist Party, otherwise known as RevCom. And I want to thank you, first and foremost, Brother Carl Dix, for coming on this program again.
Thank you for having me, John Solomon.
No problem. And I want to start off and use this as a point of departure. Can you tell us about this Stop Mass Incarceration Network that you're a member of, and what the end game is of this organization?
Okay, the Stop Mass Incarceration Network is something that was pulled together in the summer of 2011, and what I was looking at in terms of calling on others to come together to form this was 2.4 million people, locked down in prison. Around 2/3 of them Black or Latino. I was looking at the 5 million plus formerly incarcerated people who were held in a state of less than full citizenship. People who were not allowed to vote, people who couldn't live in public housing, people who could not get government loans to go back to school, to better themselves through education or maybe start a business, and people who knew they were being discriminated against when you went to apply for a job because they had that box on there, have you ever been incarcerated? And you knew if you checked it where your application was going, and you also knew if you didn't check it and the man found out that you had been incarcerated, that was grounds to fire you. Then on the other end, we were looking at the racial profiling that served as a pipeline to that racially disparate mass incarceration. That struck me as millions of people caught up in the criminal injustice system, plus the tens of millions of others who were the loved ones and family of those people. Because when a person goes to jail, they're not the only one whose life gets caught up in it. If they're a parent, their children are caught up in it. If there's someone's child, then someone's got to figure out, do I pay the rent and the gas and electric, or do I travel to visit them or make those robbery phone calls that these companies be making? So this is tens of millions of people caught up in this, and this struck me as a slow genocide that had to be taken on and stopped. I put out a call for folks to come together, and a bunch of people did. Cornel West was at the founding meeting of it, Annette Dickerson from the Center for Constitutional Rights, a few other folks. There wasn't a whole lot of us, only 11. And we decided this network has to focus on breaking the back of this mass incarceration, and that the way to do that, and folks were already doing things like filing civil suits, lobbying politicians, doing education, and some of them were doing very fine work in that framework. We felt what was missing, though, was determined mass resistance. So that's what we said we would take on. The first thing that we did was we issued the call for a campaign of civil disobedience to stop, and frisk, one of those racial profiling policies that put people on the skids to end up in prison. We did that in the fall of 2011, and we moved on from there.
So you've been, and thank you for that answer, you've been organizing around mass incarceration for quite some time, and you've also been organized around things that are inextricably linked to mass incarceration. The disproportionate amount of time people get for crack cocaine,
yes,
as opposed to powder cocaine. You've been organizing around and you got arrested for organizing around the stop and frisk. You and Cornel West did, among other activists who got arrested as well. Can you tell us how disproportionate mass incarceration is in terms of impacting the lives and communities of colors, Black and Latinos specifically?
Okay, well, you touched on one aspect of it, and that is the formerly 100-to-1 disparity on sentencing for powder and crack cocaine, which is that 5 grams of crack cocaine would get you the same sentence as 500 grams of powder cocaine, which means a kid caught on the corner with enough rocks, ready rocks, rocks of crack cocaine to either get high themselves or sell to make like $20, $30 would get the same penalty as a major dealer of powder cocaine. That was something that was done by the U.S. Congress specifically to target inner city folks. The other thing that goes into this is that when they launch their wars on crime, those are wars that get fought out in the ghettos and barrios. They don't get fought out, you know, like down on Wall Street here in New York City. There are known cocaine dens that newspaper reporters could take you to, where the Wall Street traders go and get a few lines of powder cocaine. It's known that that's going on. It's known that there are major dealers that service it. Nobody gets busted around that. But like I said, some kids on the corner in Harlem could get jacked up over a few rocks and go to jail for like 20, 30, and 40 years. That's what we are dealing with. And I call this a genocide, because genocide isn't just when they line you up against the wall and start shooting. That's the end of the process. Right. Genocide is when they trap up groupings of people, in this case designated by race and nationality, in conditions where they cannot thrive and survive as a people. And see, people talk about like, well, why do these kids not, you know, get married and form stable families and all of this? But you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of young people whose lives are going in and out of prison. How do you form a stable family unit off of that? So a lot of the things that people come down on young people around and say that their morals and their principles aren't that good are actually things that are being enforced on them by this criminal and justice system. And as a revolutionary communist, I'm looking at it like, how do you bring forward people to fight the attacks that the system brings down as part of building a movement for revolution that can get rid of this once and for all, if so many of them are trapped up in the criminal justice system? You know, because when you go out and protest a police murder, one thing that you find is that it's often the women who are mostly the ones coming out to protest, because most of the men, and they'll tell you, I got paper on me, I can't come with you today, brother. And what they mean by that is that they are on parole or probation, off of a previous arrest and conviction, and that if they stepped out in the street with you, the cops could use that to vamp on them again, revoke that parole, send them back to prison, that kind of stuff. So that's part of what we're up against.
Right. And so I know that there's some demonstrations that are going to be coming up. I know there's one in Brooklyn. I've received some information about one of the demonstrations that will be occurring in Brooklyn. What are some of the demands and demonstrations that that you like folks to know about, and how can they get involved? Where do they get more information to get involved? Especially say they're in LA or there's some in Cincinnati, Ohio, and they want to get involved in this Stop Mass Incarceration.
That's a good point, because I'm focused here in New York, but the Stop Mass Incarceration Network has to go national, because racially disparate mass incarceration is a nationwide phenomenon. And what people can do is that they can go to the website www.incarceration.org. That's Stop Mass Incarceration, all one word, .org. To look at both what's happening in New York, things that are happening in LA, happening in San Francisco, and also on the nationwide tip, there is going to be a hunger strike by prisoners in solitary confinement this coming summer, because there was a hunger strike previously focused in California. The California Department of Corrections promised to improve the conditions, but as usual, they lied, figuring once the hunger strike was over, they could stop it from starting again. Well, people in prison are going to start that again unless they get some action from the Department of Corrections. And this is something that people need to take up across the country, because people are literally being held under conditions of torture. I'm talking not just my own thinking that it's torture. I'm talking international definition. So that's something that people need to get into and get on to. I would also suggest that they go to the website www.revcom.us. There they can find some of my writings on the question of mass incarceration, police murder, and the struggle against that. Right now, the Stop Mass Incarceration Network in New York, in addition to taking on Stop and Frisk, which we have a trial coming up. We have several trials coming up around that in April, another one in May, and then stretched out into June from our protest back in 2011. But also, there's the police murder of Kimani Gray, a 16-year-old young man in Brooklyn. And, you know, the authorities have basically suppressed attempts to protest this murder. They told his mother and father that they could not have a permit for a march to protest the police killing of their son. In other words, we can kill your children, but you can't protest when we do it. And what underscores this is when people tried to protest by marching on the sidewalk, which you're supposed to have the right to do, the police vamped on and arrested 46 people. So we are working to fight through on that, to bring forward the outrage of the community and give it space, you know, to express itself. That's something that we're working on in addition to our work around mass incarceration and stop and frisk.
Right. And lastly, before I let you go, I want to ask you, I mean, you brought up Kimani Gray, and we certainly know that, you know, anywhere there are black and brown people in this country, most likely they're living under some sort of police state. You live in New York City. Can you tell folks, especially folks who are not living in New York City, like how dire the situation is when it comes to police brutality? Because this has been going on for some time, and we had, you know, you said Kimani Gray, but there was also the Graham, I think it was Marley
Graham family.
Exactly. How
in between, there's Chantel Davis, Ronaldo Cuevas, and more people than I can, you know, tell people about right now. But what it comes down to is that the authorities here have pretty much officially criminalized Black and Latino youth. And what I mean by pretty much officially, Police Chief Ray Kelly of the NYPD had the nerve to tell some black legislators that he wanted every Black and Latino young man in New York City to be afraid when he left his house in the morning that Ray Kelly's cops would stop him and search him. In other words, every Black and Latino young man is a potential criminal to be set upon by the NYPD. In other words, they have criminalized our youth, guilty until proven innocent, if they can survive to prove their innocence. And I say that not at all exaggerating, because Marley Graham, we talked about him. The cops said they saw a suspicious bulge in his waistband. They followed him to his house, kicked in his door, and shot him in his bathroom to death while his grandmother and young brother watched.
The surveillance video is dramatic and telling. At 3 p.m. Thursday, 18-year-old Marley Graham can be seen walking into his home on East 229th in the Bronx. The NYPD rushes in seconds later without a search warrant and try to gain entry.
And he's kicking the door because the door is locked. They came in with their gun drawn.
According to a resident who was inside during the forced entry,
they did not screen police.
And there is no sign of a search warrant. The surveillance video is high grade. Its clarity, that of a professional. Clearly, the officers are seen desperately trying to break into the house through the front door. The damage evident once we got our cameras inside. The video also shows the NYPD entering through the back and then unlocking the front door. Once in, The race upstairs to Graham is on. And moments later, boom, boom, is all Paulette Minzy heard. In her bathroom and barely dressed, she suddenly had a gun in her face. Minzy then put her hands up and screams,
"I'm the landlord, I'm the landlord."
Minzy said the NYPD then searched her home. They found no gun. On the second floor, and unarmed, Ramarley Graham was dead. After everything that's happened and the death of the young boy,
The death of the young boy. And
how do you trust police?
I can't trust them. I'm scared of them. Right now I'm scared of my life because I don't know what they will do. Because, you know, I don't know what they do, and if they saw me, I'm so scared.
Do you think they're doing their job?
No, they're not. They're not doing their job. They're not doing their job. They're cruel. They're very cruel, and I'm scared of my life because the cops come and put the gun in my face. I'm so scared.
And she's not the only one that is afraid. There are many people in this community who are on edge as well. We just had moments ago a car drive by here, and the drivers inside were actually cursing out the NYPD. This morning in Harlem, Reverend Al Sharpton had a gathering. He said that he is not anti-police, nor is the entire community. They are against officers getting gunned down. They are also against unarmed teenagers getting gunned down. Reporting from the Wakefield section of the Bronx, Mario Diaz, Pix 11 News. Heidi?
Thank you, Mario. The shooting of Ramarley Graham has police brutality watchdog groups stirred up. They say this most recent incident is just the latest in a string of tragic events that have been caused by what they call a policy of overstepping boundaries. Activists are calling on the mayor to re-examine police operations.
Mayor Bloomberg now. Is this brother here who was beat by a police officer and thrown on his face right here in the Bronx too a few days ago? No weapon, no gun, no knife for a bag of marijuana.
They say the Graham incident did not have to lead to a death.
Ronaldo Cuevas, he worked in a bodega, a little grocery store in New York City. The grocery store was being robbed. Somebody from the grocery store called the cops. When the cops arrived, the robbers went out the back and the people who worked in the store came out the front. The cops saw the people coming out the front of the store and started shooting. These were the victims of the robbery. And the cops were shooting at them, and they killed one of them, Ronaldo Cuevas. That's what you're dealing with. For New York City cops, they see somebody young and black or Latino, they decide they have seen a criminal. And they have killed people because they thought the wallet that they were reaching for to pull out their ID was a gun. The cell phone, because one person was calling 911 when undercover cops rolled up on him because he thought he was being jacked up. They shot him and then claimed later that they thought the cell phone was a gun. Candy bars have looked like guns. Keychains have looked like guns. I mean, you name it, and these cigarette lighters have looked like guns. That's what people are dealing with here, and we're dealing with that all across the country. But in New York City, they write it down. The police chief tells you to your face, your children are potential criminals, and I want them all to feel like my cops are sweating them. And then they go ahead and stop almost 700,000 people in 1 year under the stop and frisk official racial profiling policy. So that's what we're dealing with, and we feel like we have to hit this with determined mass resistance, because if we don't, if we give an indication that this is acceptable, then they could go ahead and do any doggone thing they want to us, and we won't end up in not being able to do anything about what they do to us. So we feel we have to resist now before we are back to the wall.
Thank you, Carl Dix. I appreciate you spending some time with us today, and we look forward to having you come on again and again to continue to update us with the progress of the Stop Mass Incarceration Network, as well as the resistance that you guys are organizing around the Stop and Frisk.
Okay, thank you for having me on, and I look forward to coming back, man.
Right on.
I I got a letter from the government the other day. I opened and read it and burned that. Man, the way that I live don't concern